Hello, and this is Myth. I was just recording a little bit of one of my favorite games before, Halo Combat Evolved, and thing came up while I was talking. When I talk about Halo, I think about another game called Myth, and when I think about Myth, I think about a game called Halo. If I were editing savvy and wanted to put the time in, I would cut between them, but I like making everything very simple, very immediate. I talk in Halo, I upload Halo, and I think there's still a way I can show you in the same night what they are. You can click between them to see one and then the other. What I mean, I can just record a video on Myth right after I do a video on Halo, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. Myth was on my mind, so I thought I'm going to get it and I'm going to show you, and I'm pretty sure I've figured out a way to do that. No menus or anything, we just jump straight into the game because, well, it's just a quirk of how it is. It doesn't like letting you record its menus. It's a very old game. I'm kind of amazed it was easy to record at all, but yes, everything but the menus works. Feel free to skip over this preamble, it's just not interesting. But now, into Myth. What is Myth? Why do I love it? Myth, as you can see, is a strategy game. That's what people call this. It's a game where you look down from above and give orders to little virtual people. And the little virtual people are warriors. They're here to fight a little virtual war. It's a war between humans and general good, socialized, well-mannered things against monsters who have bad manners. They have poor intentions towards civilization. We have to stop them. There are people who describe this game in various different ways, but something which I think is weirdly absent from the discourse, or whatever you'd like to call it. There really is basically no discourse. This game was pretty much forgotten until probably just very recently it entered a lot of people's radars because that YouTube character I mentioned now and then as not thinking too much of him maybe is that Mandalore guy. He made a video on it, so here I am making content merchandise for the Mandalore YouTube franchise. This is Myth as seen in the Mandalore review, recap, Let's Play, nostalgia critic thing, whatever the hell it is he calls his silly videos. That's not important. What I mean to say is, Myth is an interesting thing which I think is talked about very little, and what's said about it is not interesting or useful because people are stuck in conventional ways of seeing which do not actually say very much or see very much, in my opinion. And I'm very much just trying to break you out of... Whenever I'm talking about something, I'm trying to break you and myself out of what I see as pretty much mental dead ends, bad language traps which prevent you from saying anything interesting if you take them seriously. People call this Generally, people say the looking down from above and giving orders game is a strategy game, like that is the essential experience here. This is a vaguely strategic activity, but so is planning out a gunfight in Halo, I would say. And more particularly, real-time strategy comes with a lot of non-essential things. When people say that, they mean, oh, well, I'm building a base, I'm collecting gems to hire more wizards out of my barracks and so on. We're not doing that here. Everyone is just... The gang's all here at the start, and then we start fighting the monsters. So some people say, oh, well, it's not really a real-time strategy because that's like Command and Conquer when you go and, that's when you have to go and build the base and collect the gems and so on. It's not that, so it must be. And they don't actually start thinking there. That's just not what people do. They think, okay, what thought Terminator do I call this instead? I know it's a real-time tactics game because what is the difference between strategy and tactics? It is whether or not you are building miners to harvest the gems to fund your barracks production queue. This is a real-time tactics game. Perfect. Now we know exactly what's going on. We perfectly understand the intentions of Bungie in creating this. But of course you can hear from my tone, that's not true. There's a fair bit going on here. It's much more interesting than that. And I just realized I had the sound turned off from before, and we're going to be cutting to a victory screen, and I'll go back to the menu and start it again, but first in here we'll actually turn up our volume and see how that works. I'll do one one more battle as a kind of demo of this. This was my intention here, to skip these because they don't record right, and then just shoot into a battle, and just like I was doing in Halo, showing you a battle playing out over and over again, I just want to show you this game in motion so I can talk generally about it without having to fuss about doing justice to one part of the experience or another. I'm using this as a kind of demo scene, this first level scenario where we just have different pieces of the game lining up to fight each other. There are a few other levels I see as good like this, and I'll do them in the future if I want to show off more of the game, but this is Myth, and why I'm showing you Myth, I think it's very strongly related to Halo, and the tangent I was just on, let me get back to that. Does real-time tactics do this justice? No, just like I think first-person shooter does not do Halo justice, I really think that to appreciate the intentions of the creators here, we have to look at what they did that they didn't have to, what they did that other games weren't doing, and generally what strikes us as really memorable while engaging with it. Again, why don't I just talk over screenshots or something? Why don't I just, I don't know, have a bunch of B-roll trailers for the game playing? I think that by prompting ourselves with the phenomenal experience of actually playing the thing, we tend to keep ourselves on base. I'm going to do a bit of different stuff here to make it play out a touch differently, but yes, generally when people talk about video games, the trouble is off base, just, you know, the tail is wagging the dog, the theories which are meant to explain the thing end up obfuscating it, and we bend our understanding of the thing towards these inherited theories. You know, it's the general problem of art criticism that people are stupid and easily led by elaborate language. You can hear now, the game has funny voices and such, but I'm not going to focus on that right now. I just thought it might be fun for you to have some noise while I speak. Now, what do I consider striking about this beyond that we don't have a base and we aren't farming gems right now? Myth, as I see it, is the Master Chief without Halo more than anything else. I'm not on the ground with a gun pointing it at these zombies, but otherwise, you know, I was just playing Halo without firing the gun, and I think that the situation that you get when you do that, you don't fire the gun while playing Halo, is extremely similar to how Myth works. What you get now is a bunch of semi-autonomous actors who are, yeah, just doing their best to survive and kill each other, and unlike in Halo, they will take general prompts from me and do their best to survive while also obeying what I tell them to do. And Halo was, as I said, at one point this in a newer engine with guns. When I put it that way, Halo without firing a gun, do you understand what I mean? In Halo, of course, the Marines are not really more intelligent so much as the orders are pre-given by Bungie. I've talked about that a bit in my videos, where this game is scripted where, pardon me, everything is sort of intelligent but largely kind of pre-handed down instructions driven, and how the other side works during the missions of this game, the levels, is basically how the Marines work in Halo. There is no really elaborate instruction book down for these guys. If I were to open the editor and make a new level and just drop them in open space, they wouldn't start hunting and killing. They would basically stand idle. They have very little anything approaching what we might call true or good AI. They're very simple, but they're given cues which we can't see as we're playing, which, like in Halo, just because every environment is pre-constructed and thoughtfully crafted, these actors are following their cues very rigorously, look a lot like they're behaving intelligently because they never step outside of, you know, things which have been scripted for. If you drop a Halo Marine in an empty space you've constructed which doesn't have the level programmer's cues in it, you might find that they don't act as intelligently as you would expect them to. You might be disappointed. I just think that's an incidental and interesting detail. But back to the essential point, I'm trying very hard not to get caught up in trivia basically here. So what I should really be doing is just watching them fight. The next time I'll just do that, but while I'm on a roll here, what does it mean to be Halo without the Master Chief? By that I mean basically a very robust, rules-based, reactive little battle simulation kind of thing. A living world within your computer which just kind of plays out semi-autonomously, and that is the whole appeal. If you read the manual for this game, you can see that the inspiration was things like Braveheart. That's more obvious in a few other scenes. There are Scottish men in this game, it's very funny. A detail I just want to catch, they cheer and animate when they win a battle. I think that's very cute. But yes, where was I? I was just saying that the inspiration was war movies and such. Like a lot of other games, Age of Empires 2, I believe, also exists because of Braveheart. Really, that movie... I think it's funny to think about how many movies have been huge in popular culture, like would we have Rome Total War if it weren't for Gladiator, and this game and Age of Empires 2 because of Braveheart. It's all very interesting, but the more essential point, again, in terms of this as a game, is that Bungie were guys who, they had two interests. One was their kind of literary one, their aspirations there, and the other were their STEM ones. The STEM interest was creating a kind of robust and reactive system which would do cool stuff on a level that was more advanced conceptually than what anyone else was doing. And the other very cool idea they had was that it would be kind of very tactile, very high fidelity in that sense I try to hammer down in Halo. Hopefully you get what I mean when I say if I zoom in on the terrain, you can see the similarity to Halo and why I like both. It's very jagged but very solid in the sense that because you can see the seams, you can understand that this terrain is solid in the logic of the game. It's on a level where it's made at the finest level possible where it could be made to play by fair and consistent rules. Unreal Engine might have fancier ground than this, but is it ground which behaves like it looks? Can you really predict anything by looking at it? No, but in this, if I say have an arrow fired at this hill or a grenade thrown onto it, I can tell that it will behave in a consistent way that makes sense. Let me just have this man throw something. Watch. Look, it's a sprite that bounces like a three-dimensional object, and again, we had lots of grenades flying around in the last Halo video, and yeah, this game and Halo, same engine, they just couldn't render everything in 3D yet for a sheer want of computing power. The logic of 3D was already there, and I find that really interesting that, look, calculations are going off and such. That's not a flat arc that he just does every single time. On certain levels, certain environmental conditions like rain will prevent your bombs from blowing up when thrown, and when that happens you can really see these things bounce and slide around in a way which is frankly more elaborate than the behavior of objects moving through 3D space in games made this year. I'll be sure to try to show you some of that later if I do this again, just to show off how much cool stuff this game has going on. A point that I've been meaning to say in the Halo things, I don't know if I did, was that I feel like on pretty much every metric that we aren't used to quantifying, video games have been regressing and going backwards, and Myth is absolutely full of details which are really cool, which games have gotten obviously much worse at, but we don't have the language to talk about them, so these are just details that we forget every single time. Nobody knows how to talk about the cool things this does, and so the cool things that this game does basically died, were lost to the history of gaming. And why I might sound like I've got a bit of a bone to pick with that Mandalore character is just that, you know, there's the opportunity, if that man has a kind of job or responsibility, it's to help lead people to a better appreciation of things, but of course, what ends up happening there, it's not his fault, it's really the pattern of YouTube, and I'm not saying every random person has this job of saving culture or civilization or whatever, but if he were to do, how would you get the most value out of making a video of this? I would say it would be to lead people to a better appreciation of what made it good, and when I watched his video, I didn't really get the impression that anything that actually makes Myth was really being said. It was more like recycling the game into a new form of entertainment, which is the video. And yeah, maybe some people, because they saw it, will pick this up and play it themselves. If so, that's very cool, but I think that You know, what makes Myth Myth? Was I getting that? Not really, it's just kind of, here's a game, it has cool sound effects and things, here's the plot over random footage of that happening, and we're just going to kind of nostalgia critic this thing until the end. The end of the story, that is, but there's no end to appreciating the different fine moving parts of this thing. You could talk forever about the fine mechanical interactions between these various moving parts. Let's stop giving orders and just watch these guys fight. Like the Marines, I can just watch in Halo fighting the aliens, I can just watch this happen for a long time. It's very cool and visceral. Everything is just doing a bit more than it needs to. Everything is leaving behind viscera, like in Halo. Every little arrow, it becomes an object in the world. Every body leaves behind a fairly violent mess. There's just loads going on. It's very entertaining to me. Give you a close-up look of all these different guys, some terrain, some dead goblin dudes. I hope that I'm a bit aimless and probably talking a bit too much and not just showing off enough stuff, but I hope that by looking at this you can appreciate Halo as I do, which is kind of a very impressive achievement in the, what I see as the technical side of the vision of Bungie, which is, okay, let's make this kind of virtual battle world scenario, whatever, inside your computer, and it's going to have things which will blow your mind, approach from this very novel perspective of not like, okay, it's going to be a real-time strategy game with shinier gems, or it's going to have the most, you know, tight movement mechanics. Like, no, they weren't very much bound by thinking like gamers, even at this point. It's very much... Yeah, that's kind of the problem with the popular reception of everything in video games, that people think like gamers. Bungie were thinking like nerds who had this idea of what would be cool, and it's just blank slate from there. They don't have to think in received terminology of, okay, how do you make a video game cooler? You add more ferns, you make it so you have to click more so it looks more impressive while you're playing, you make it more addictive for Koreans when they choose to play online. Every strategy game now, it's all balance and so on. This game had an online scene, if you want to call it that. People played it online, but it wasn't made for them. They were a consideration, of course. I'm not saying it happened by accident, but the idea that, like, that is all there is to this, and that is the coolest thing you could be doing to this, that was very much not the case, and I think that Bungie would never have wanted to make this if the idea was to primarily make something that people would just compete in online. The intention of Myth is not to replace chess or succeed it. The intention of Myth is to replace or succeed Braveheart. That, I think, is what I may have been driving at that whole time. Do you understand what I mean when I say that the point of this is to feel more alive than a movie and be cooler than it because of that? Do you understand where I'm going, and do you see why I love Myth for that? What I love in pretty much every game is parts that feel autonomous. That is what things can do. You can of course express yourself through interactive elements, but that's very hard, and Western games have frankly never been good at that. What I think they're very strong at, of course Japanese are good at this too, but what I think Western games, a lot of them are very good at, a detail which is poorly understood and so poorly recreated and often just lost to time, is they do this kind of simulation that we aren't used to calling simulation. You read the manual for Age of Empires, it's clear they even thought of that as simulation to an extent, balanced with replacing chess. It was a game and a simulation at the same time. It replaces movies, it replaces games. Myth was more aimed at replacing movies, and how did I start that tangent? Yes, what are Western games good at? When I was playing Age of Empires 1 as a kid, I didn't even have access to the internet. I was not thinking, oh wow, one day my APM is gonna get so high and I'm gonna be on Twitch beating everyone with my high elo. I was not thinking that. I was thinking, oh wow, it's like this little world full of cavemen and spearmen and stuff in my computer, and isn't it cool and scary how they're all fighting to death and then I'm in charge of that. That is very much, you know, strategy games at one point were just weird jungle experience. It's just very severe, very violent, very real, very high stakes and gloomy. Myth is best understood as like, people say it's like, it's the meme to say, oh, did you know it's inspired by the Black Company, those novels? And yeah, I read like 50 pages of one of them once. I found it kind of boring. Frankly, Myth does not have a very elaborate story. There's basically one level I find really interesting and two for reasons nobody but me thinks of, because, you know, just me doing my thing, basically. Reading it almost like Halo. But where I was going anyway, that yes, Myth, the meme is, oh, it's like the Black Company. It's got vague kind of the tone. What I would say it has going for it really is just that it feels like dark fantasy in that sense of, this is a picture of a world which is very alive, very high stakes, and very hostile. In that sense, I would say, yeah, it's like the Black Company. It's really like any fantasy work in which people aren't smiling at elves and hobbits and people just kind of like die in a very gloomy way. It's just a very... it's kind of almost a stock dark fantasy work. I have great respect for Bungie as writers, but Myth is frankly just not that interesting on that level. The idea of explaining Myth by talking about its plot strikes me as kind of inane, because it's really not that kind of work. Myth is your kind of movie battle reenactment thing, with the setting and the story as kind of a neat for the time thing, but really a kind of contrivance which shows a bit of age in that it's not age as in like, oh, people are better at writing now, but age as in like, yeah, I can tell this was just kind of a supplementary piece of work to fill out a 90s game, which was, you know, more interested in the moving parts side than the complete multimedia experience side. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Yeah, where was the focus in this? It was a bit of everywhere. I respect all of Bungie's craftsmanship. What writing there is good, but this is really more of a Halo prototype, this whole game, than anything else. It's a Halo prototype in that we have this engine which has been, you know, up from Marathon, which is very flat, very pseudo three-dimensional, very much just a Doom kind of clone successor thing which exists to let you have this basic, very simple, visceral thrill of shooting things that are right in front of you, but mostly it's a vehicle for this kind of multimedia novel which they wrote. There's a kind of novel way for you to think about Marathon, that it's kind of like a visual novel with a Doom mini-game on top of it, where the intention was mostly to sell you this written science fiction work, and yeah, you get the visuals and the experience of the three-dimensional space, but it's really about the writing. It's multimedia, driven by and focused on writing, and so visual novel, I think, is actually a good baseline way to think about video games, in the sense of visual novel primes you to think of, okay, baseline parts of a multimedia work. It looks a certain way, it sounds a certain way, there's a bare baseline of interaction, and then there is the story or writing, and you can think of Marathon as, okay, instead of clicking to the next box and making a decision now and then, I'm actually moving through a space and shooting. So every game can be thought of as a VN with more parts. In Marathon, it's a VN with shooting. Myth is so advanced a beast that there is barely any text, and you are just entirely moved beyond that to the point of commanding your way through this world. It is entirely given over to the experience of space, whereas Marathon is a work which is, yeah, like 3/4 of VN, despite the fact that it takes place in virtual space. Just any game which is a story game, don't think of it as a game with a story. Think of every game just kind of a way to mentally spin your chessboard around and stop saying stupid things. Every game is a VN with more and more elaborate multimedia parts on top. Think of that and you might come to some interesting places. And again, that's how I think of Bungie games, that think of everything as starting life as a literary concept. We do live in a very letters-oriented age, even in the declining period of language which we're experiencing now. People think of the world in literary terms. Every project starts out life as a verbal idea rather than a physical one, I believe. Even a physical game like this one And I am probably getting very ahead of myself with the abstractions now. I said I just wanted to give you a physical battle to enjoy, and I'm just getting more and more off the mark every time, but some people apparently just like the sound of my voice, so maybe you like me just going on tangents and tangents from those tangents. But yes, where was I? Anyway, if Marathon was basically a novel which had as many parts as it needed to be more interesting as a novel on top of that, Myth is the opposite. It is a physical beast which had those parts put on top to become more physical. In some cases, the writing works, in others it doesn't. I would still recommend that you probably try that mental exercise every time just to see if it helps.
Casualty.
Yeah, so again, just to summarize, just because I want to bring this together, Marathon was their writer's game, Myth is their physical STEM world creation game, and I really think Halo is where these tendencies came together. And the fact that Halo was on this engine and aesthetically lifting from Marathon, I think really brings it together as a nice full picture of Halo, the final successor, which was going to unite the physical engine, the physicality practice they got in with this game, combined with the narrative exercise of Marathon. And I think I've talked a bit about what I think were the narrative ambitions and the aesthetic vision of Halo, but not to the point where I'm entirely satisfied, so I'll have to come back to that, and we'll have opportunities to as I get further through that game. And here is the nice just ending screen to this game. This level, you can see that it tracks everyone with a name and their kill count, and if I were to play the rest of the game, it would carry over survivors into future battles. It's very cool. You can see a pretty nice breakdown of how everything went, which soldiers you lost, who was fighting well and who wasn't, who was the hero of your fight, as it says here. Just back to the details of Myth, but I should just round out with that last thought again. Myth is important because I see so much Halo DNA in it, and Marathon I think is interesting as well, Myth and Marathon as self-contained works, but I think they're both more interesting because they were both kind of, you wed these two things together and the product is Halo Combat Evolved, which I really see as the peak of Bungie's work as video game developers. And I'm going to call it here, and I really hope this video behaved itself while I was talking.